Hi there, welcome back to Westeros.org on YouTube as we discuss episode 5 of House of the Dragons, We Light the Way. The episode opens with Prince Daemon resolving his inconvenient marriage with Rhea Royce in a rather brutal fashion. And to the south, King Viserys and Princess Rhaenyra sail to Dragonstone, propose that she marry the C6 son and heir, Sir Laenor.
And accompanying them on this trip is the Lord Lionel Strong, the new Hand of a King, who has replaced Otto. His predecessor, on the other hand, is actually leaving King's Landing as this is going on, and there's this rainstorm over King's Landing. It's
very dreary.
Very dreary, very grey. And Alicent sort of talks to him at the gate, saying, if you hadn't pushed so hard, you'd still be... And he tells her, a war is going to come if Rhaenyra becomes queen. It doesn't matter if you want it or not. And Rhaenyra, to protect herself, will have to kill your children. So you have to choose. You have to choose between Rhaenyra, or you have to choose between your children.
And she's left in tears and still very conflicted about whether to choose Rhaenyra or her children, or she hopes for Rhaenyra's mercy. But she starts to find a potential new ally in the somewhat creepy Larys Strong. I mean, there is something about him.
Yeah, Larys Clubfoot, I think, is it? I don't think they've ever called him that
They
yet.
haven't called him, but they have shown that he has a clubfoot. And he informs her that the Grand Maester brought a tea to Rhaenyra the night of the events that led to her father's dismissal.
Back on Driftmark and the Castle of High Tide, the marriage is arranged with the Sea Snake, although he pushes quite hard. He really is ambitious, and he says, well, maybe Rhaenyra's children, when they sit the throne, or the heir, should have the Velaryon name. And Viserys says, no, not that. But
no, he definitely doesn't go for that. And then they kind of leave it up to Rhaenyra and Laenor to have negotiations on their own to, get to know each other. And they make it quite clear that Laenor does not care for women, of course, and she knows it. And it's clearly... I don't know if it's even supposed to be a secret. It's a very open secret in that case. It's very obvious that he has no interest in women, but they agree to do their duty, but allow themselves to have, seek comfort elsewhere. So Laenor's current lover, Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, is very supportive of this arrangement. He doesn't mind his lover becoming the king consort, the future king consort, as long as he gets to stay in the picture.
Oh, we have a snory little puppy. We'll move him after this section.
It's very cute, though.
Sir Criston Cole, on the other hand, is not very happy at all. As they return to King's Landing, he tells Rhaenyra, let's run away to the Free Cities. I can be a sellsword. We can live together as man and wife. And she says no. I mean, my duty is the throne. I don't want to live... a pauper's life.
She starts trying to tell him about the whole, the Song of Ice and Fire, on that it's much bigger than me, but he has stalked off before that. He feels that he broke his vows for her, and now she's refusing to have him, basically.
So pretty much as soon as they arrive, Queen Alicent is summoning him to question him, because he was the guard outside of her door. And she expects him to maybe reveal anything that happened, and maybe... that Rhaenyra did run off with Daemon and sleep with him. Cole, on the other hand, kind of misunderstands, thinks that she knows about him and Rhaenyra, and he confesses everything to her.
Yep. It's like she's, it's one of those classic where she is telling him, asking him what happened, and he's like, oh shit, and confesses the completely wrong thing, and...
that kind of leads Alicent to then resolve herself on which side she's on. And she shows up wearing green, which Larys, I think, is telling Harwin, you know what that means, in the high tower.
When the flame on top of the high tower burns green, that summons for the bannermen to war. So she is essentially summoning her side to war by appearing at the wedding feast. Late as well, she makes quite an entrance and walks in her green gown.
It's a lovely gown, actually.
It's a lovely gown, it's a lovely call to war. And then, the feast it starts pretty well. There are some eye rolls from Rhaenyra. I mean, that sort of eye roll, I heartily approve. That was a classy eye roll when
Jason Lannister,
Lannister came up to and introduced himself and wished her well with the betrothal and everything. That was a really good eye roll. But things go very poorly when Joffrey Lonmouth decides that he's figured out that Rhaenyra's paramour is Kristen Cole, and decides to have a little chat with him about, hey, we both know something about these people, and we're very interested in things working out well here and being kept as their thing on the side, not realizing that things haven't gone down so well with Rhaenyra.
So Cole basically smashes his face in. It's very shocking. The crowd. It's an interesting mix of a crowd reaction of shock and screams, and then there are people who are kind of like, fist fight.
That one was
very brutal.
Yeah, we'll have some more things to say about that, I think.
In the aftermath, the wedding happens very quickly, and Lena is heartbroken, tears. And in the Godswood, Kristen Cole has decided he's going to kill himself for what he's done when Alicent appears and calls his name, and that's how the episode ends. Very momentous episode as far as that goes. We have some big things happening, but and so it's a very... I thought the episode, I was certainly showing a feast with like courtly dances and that kind of very nice.
It was really nice. It was a really opulent feast, and the gowns and the layout of the food, and the Inn at the Crossroads was going to be screen capping that and looking closely at dishes to make, I'm sure.
And if you paid attention to the musicians, there was one very notable musician there.
Who was watching very closely what was happening, I think.
He must have been. He didn't. He looked very much like he was busy drumming, but I'm guessing he had plenty of time to give a look around. He's observant.
He's a multitasker, I think.
All right. So after this, we'll talk about some of the changes.
Yes, because there are a few, definitely.
Talking about changes, the first again is going back to the previous episode. It's sort of a dance between the conflicting sources and how to deal with them. Because again, we have a scene that's straight from the book. Cole attempting to get Rhaenyra to flee with him. It's almost exactly what Septon Eustace, one of the 3 chief sources for the Dance of Dragons, reports. And he also says Rhaenyra rejects him in the same way. Now, Mushroom, who we saw drumming away, has a different story. And he claims that Rhaenyra approached Kristen Cole naked under her cloak and said, I saved my maidenhood for you. And in disgust, he rejects her. And after that, would be her enemy from then on. Obviously, we have...
Clearly had something against naked women. if that made him her enemy.
No, so she rejects. He's in love. He wants to run away. She says, no, we can't do that. And it looks like he's going to turn to hating her because of that.
Yes, and Alicent coming in and basically saving him. I mean, we already have in the scene where he confesses to Alicent. I mean, that's the first time because he throws himself on her mercy and basically asks to give her that she'll give him an honorable death instead of gelding him or sending him to the wall or whatever.
Which
is the standard.
It's what Jaehaerys did to Lucamore Lusty, Lucamore Strong, when it discovered that he had a number of wives, a number of children.
Yes, so he's already thrown himself on her mercy and found her to be, sympathetic to him, and now she essentially rescues him from himself and is going to offer him a purpose.
Yeah, well, I guess. I'm left with questions about this whole thing, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes, definitely some questions about the whole thing. Another change, which we touched on earlier, was I think it was in the previous episode where I said that, or it must have been at Stepstone's episode.
Third episode, yes, and we mentioned it in our review as well.
Where we mentioned that Laenor has been changed into being a knight, even a fine knight, according to Daemon, when he's speaking to his sister. So that is quite a change.
That was actually to Rhaenyra, actually.
Was it to Rhaenyra? Yes, that's right, of course, it's to Rhaenyra, sorry. I thought it was when he was chatting up Laena, but no, it's talking to Rhaenyra about her new betrothed, of course. So, from going from not being a knight at all to a fine knight, we think that this may be partially a response to the depiction of Renly Baratheon in Game of Thrones, because Renly, another gay character, was changed from being a fine knight who rode in tourneys, did not fear battle, to someone who practically fainted at the sight of blood.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe they were concerned that if we have another gay character and have him not be a knight, then it's too stereotypical. So it's unfortunate that one wrong with Renly then leads to another wrong with Laenor.
In theory, I mean, the obvious other excuse or idea of Gavs is like, well, by having him be a martial figure, he could be involved in the Stepstones, because he wasn't in Fire and Blood. He is not someone who's despite having a dragon, he's not a martial man. He doesn't.
Well, I think it may very well be a bit of both, to be honest, because I think they did want to avoid that depiction and any possible complaints that would come from that.
Then we have Joffrey Lonmouth, the lover, who comments, you know, call me a Knight of Kisses, but I don't know why. This is presumably...
I hope he knows why, actually, because...
Yes. The arms of House Lonmouth, they are a house from the Stormlands, is a golden skulls and red lips, so the motto of a choice is yours. So basically, you can choose a kiss or you can choose death. And he does die in relation to the wedding, but at a celebratory tournament where Kristen Cole beats him with... particular savagery, and he dies this lingering death after several days. Murdering him in the court is extraordinary.
It's interesting, by the way, if we go back to the tourney situation in the book, what the explanation would be, because if we presume that Cole has rejected or been rejected by Rhaenyra, and then he takes it out on Rhaenyra's new husband's lover.
Yeah,
it's perhaps a bit of a roundabout way, or just that he's taken to hating everything relating to Rhaenyra in any way.
Well, but the marriage with Laenor is what led her to either reject him or reject the idea of running away with him. You know, I like the bit where he talked about, you know, I've soiled my cloak.
Yeah.
Again,
because she suggests that she could have him as her lover.
Yeah.
But he does not take very well to that.
No, it's interesting. Like he's honorable enough. Like but he really did care about the vows. But he kind of let the little head think for the big head, and so he's in love with her, and he's willing to take the consequences. But he wants to try to reclaim some measure of his honor by at least, you know, making it a proper marriage, and you know, not pretending to be a Kingsguard when he's not following the vows,
and certainly not cheating on her husband, even if it's with the husband's permission, I think.
So that was very interesting. A little bit, again, I can definitely see A Feast for Crows. Arys Oakheart is a Kingsguard knight who has very similar feelings and conflicted feelings about his position and in relation to a woman and his vows. But the murder, you know, we've seen the next episode, the 6th episode at least, does not address how he goes from murdering someone in court to just continuing on with his life. Something should have happened. And
it is one of those bits where they've stressed the violence and the decadence, I think, and gone a bit too far.
Yes.
And again, they're a little fond of the whole smashed in heads.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, when people are flinging around morning stars and such, I don't, but
the fact that we don't
punching
need all
his
the
face
details.
head in, it's a bit much.
And another death, which is perhaps not quite to, or it isn't quite to the book, is Rhea Royce's death. Now, it is said to be a hunting accident. However, in the book, she does not die immediately. She lingers for 9 days and then gets out of bed and collapses and dies. So she's not entirely unconscious either. So it sounds like if there had been any obvious foul play, she could have said so. I mean, she might have been unconscious for some days, and then she seemed to be at least conscious enough to try and get out of bed and then collapse. And if there had been foul play, it ought to have been revealed. I could see a cut girth or something that wasn't discovered, something like that. But it's quite clear anyway that Daemon was not personally there to see to her death. He was still fighting on Bloodstone and the Stepstones. And then when word reached him of her death, he immediately flew to the Vale to claim her seat. And that's another change. Because
I don't understand why.
No, that one is odd. Because Rhea Royce is actually the Lady of Runestone in the books, not the heir. She is a ruling lady, and he is essentially her consort.
I can only think they decided that having a woman ruling on people, well, what's the big deal of Rhaenyra?
I suppose so, but although there is a bit of a difference between
ruling a seat and ruling the whole kingdom.
Ruling the whole kingdom. I mean, we've already met in Game of Thrones ruling ladies, didn't we? Or did we not actually see any? Well, there's Lady Mormont.
Yeah, later, yes, I was talking about her because people said they liked her. Oh, in Bloody Ben Blackwood, if they have him as a young lord.
It would be a similar vibe.
So yes, maybe they had others. I'm informed that the Sands take over Dorne, right? So.
Yeah, let's. No, it didn't happen.
Yeah, it was very funny when I had said I'm done with this series with that, and then let me at least kind of look at a transcript of the first episode of the new season. I said maybe I'll change my mind. And the opening is in Dorne, as I recall, and at some point I reach them killing Doran Martell. Yeah. And I literally left the room and went to another room and covered my head with a pillow and just So anyways, yeah.
Yes, they have touched upon the subject of ruling ladies before. They may not have wanted to complicate things in the series itself here. I think people would understand the difference. But anyway, poor Rhea never got to be Lady of Runestone before she fell off her horse and cracked her skull and died here with a little help of...
Here, I think she broke her neck, given that she was clearly paralyzed.
I mean, yes, that's what she's supposed to do in the book as well, actually. It says that she broke her neck, I think.
Yeah. How does she get out of her bed then?
Or maybe they didn't say break her neck then, or...
I don't recall exactly what it said there.
I mean, you can, but maybe she...
Anyways.
She was not feeling very well at the end of that.
No. Anyway. All right, then some background information. This episode has a few interesting things to discuss. The sea snake meets the king at high tide, his seat. Let's talk about him because obviously he is one of the great men of Westeros at the time. He is one of the greatest adventurers that we know of has ever lived.
Has there been any other really famous...
Lomas Longstrider.
Yeah, okay, of course, Longstrider, but we don't get as much detail about...
I forget exactly her name, but there's the Valyrian woman who spent 3 years flying south, trying to find him the Sophorios and not finding it.
Fair enough, that counts.
And I guess Alyssa Farman
as well. Yeah, okay.
So we see mementos from his journeys there in High Tide, and in an interview, Steve Toussaint has mentioned that Ryan Condal has background on what each of them means. So when he looks at them, he knows, this is when I did this, and this is that. A bit of world building that he enjoys. Now these relate to the voyages that the Sea Snake has taken over the years. The 9 Voyages is the title of a book that someone who went with him on some of these journeys wrote. And he made his house the wealthiest in all Westeros, richer than the Hightowers, who are actually very wealthy. Old Town is a great port. Richer even than the Lannisters with all their gold. He started sailing very young as a child with an uncle and worked as part of a crew each year until he was a captain at the age of 16. He proceeded to sail to free cities. He went to the Summer Isles. He went to the Wall. He went to Hardhome, beyond the Wall. He went to the port of Ibn in the far north. And he took his ship, the Ice Wolf, in search of a northern passage around Westeros, which is actually a big thing about, if you know anything about your nautical history, it was a big thing trying to find a northern passage around North America. But he turned back and he failed.
I wonder if there is one.
Maybe.
Probably ice covered.
And probably not good for your health to go up that far north.
No.
Most famously, however, he designed and had men build the ship called the Sea Snake, which he took as his... or he became his sort of by name.
Yeah.
But he took on 9 voyages to Essos. He went to Karth, which is where Dany was in the second season. Yiti, Leng, Ashai, the Thousand Islands, Nefer, and more. And these are all places that George kind of... it's very funny. A lot of these places... Karth and Yiti had already been mentioned. Leng and Ashai... And Ashai had been mentioned, but Leng and the Thousand Islands, Nefer... when George was working on the Lands of Ice and Fire, they asked him to kind of fill in the gaps, and he kind of created
more names, please.
more names. So he decided to fill in stuff, and he created the names. He had little 2 sentences, 3 sentences here and there, kind of giving some information about them. Not realizing that when the World of Ice and Fire came around, that was more information that he had to provide us for the book. So the last voyage, he took a sea state to Carth with a hold full of gold, and he ended up using it to purchase more ships. And he filled them with rare, valuable goods in turn, like tiger skins and elephants.
Squeeze in a few islands.
But not despite persistent rumors, he did not find a recipe to Thousand Islands dressing. That would have you could have understood as Wolf indeed. I just had to.
Yeah, that would have changed Westeros forever.
14 of the ships made it, I believe, and none of the elephants did. But it still became fabulously wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much. I mean, and this was true for some shipping in the real world as well. That when you went out and were able to take in spices and valuables and ship them over, you could count on losing a certain number of ships
and still make it
and still make a fabulous profit.
Yeah, I mean the going off to the New World or going off to the East Indies was a route to sure wealth. If your ships made it, and you didn't need to have everything.
Or you could do the East Indies thing that the ship Gothenburg did. Just have to fit that in where it went to China, made all the voyage back, and sank in the harbor of Gothenburg.
It's a beautiful ship. They reconstructed it, and I think, is it still parked here, or is it off to Asia again?
It's sailed off now again, so it's out on voyage again.
So he built High Tide, which is the castle we see on the show. It was very fabulous, made from with the same marble that's used in the Erie, mined from the Vale, or quarried from the Vale. And because the old castle, they had Castle Driftmark, was kind of damp and moldy and so on. So.
And not good for your health.
And with all the concentrated wealth that Driftmark has, I think it was mentioned once already. Spicetown was mentioned. So they
as Vagar having her lair near Spicetown.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yep. So Spicetown, and there's another town that were basically sprang up because of all that wealth concentrated there. Trade got pulled that way, so the ships would stop there instead, and that would just add to their wealth. Very
quite
big
the
success.
monopoly.
Yeah, quite the almost too much so. You could have to wonder why. It must have negatively impacted the trade to King's Landing. It must have impacted Old Town's trade. You'd think there would be some, and I mean maybe that is part of the conflict that exists that we're not really thinking about. But the High Towers don't mind if Corlys is complaining about losses because of.
True, but that's actually.
Although it would affect them as well as the thing. It's Stepstones, so it's a little.
Yes, everyone's affected if trade through the Broken Arm and such.
Or
passage there is made more complicated. It's true because so much comes from across the narrow sea.
Oh, one other thing we see, of course, is his seat, the Driftwood throne, was moved from Castle Driftmark. According to legend, it was given to them by the Merling King, who to kind of as a mark of a pact that they had made between them.
Yeah.
So that they would.
So they certainly are very sea oriented and have, I guess, one of the houses outside of the Ironborn that have really the most sea connection in that sense.
Yeah.
They would get along fabulously.
Well, not the Ironborn so much. The Manderleys have a whole sea thing in White Harbor, of course. So.
That's true. That's an interesting one as well. And speaking of old houses, we also feature for a while there, and we have another scion of House Royce that shows up at the wedding feast and being rather gloomy about Rhea's death and the fact that Daemon shows up to the feast and doesn't seem too much of a grieving husband.
No, definitely not.
A widower, rather. House Royce of Runestone is an ancient house descended of the First Men, and they were once the Bronze Kings, and they have this heirloom armor made of bronze and covered with runes that is said to protect the wearer from harm. And the Royces shown on the show today, they wear leather jerkins with runic engravings and bits of bronze, so one would imagine this is sort of reflecting the original armor, or maybe there should be a suit of armor somewhere in the castle.
Yeah, I mean she's not the ruling, and would it fit her? Probably not.
I don't know that it's probably not magic armor that automatically changes to fit whoever is wearing it at the time. Do the runes actually work? Well,
not just any old runes, no.
No, I mean, the ancestral suit of armor, maybe, but the last Royce king, Robert II, was killed in battle, so it didn't seem to work that well for him.
Certainly we see in A Game of Thrones, Bronze John Royce rides with his two sons in the tournament, and his sons, he wears the actual bronze armor, whereas his sons are wearing, silvered steel, but with bronze runes that kind of to mimic it, but it doesn't seem to help them too much.
No. Their words kind of call to mind is the ancient nature of the house, because it's we remember. And they kind of have an interesting design to the castle on the show, because it echoes the detail from the novels that the old pre-Andal castles have the primarily square towers and keeps. So certainly this seems to be the ancient Royce castle that we're supposed to see here. And that's interesting, and they're a fun house.
Yeah.
And, one that people generally had all these images of and imagination around, Bronze John Royce and his armor and everything. So,
For sure. And, obviously, John Royce becomes more significant in the story, in Stars of Fire. If you read A Feast for Crows, The Death of Dragons, of the sort of the Lord's Declarant and so on. In this time period, for not
marriage is probably the most notable thing, really.
Yeah, until after events that the show will cover, but then the veil becomes more important and so on. So when they have another giant lord, who I believe, if I recall correctly, was the uncle of Lady Rhea. I don't know what they'll do now, if it's supposed to be her father instead. No. Since they haven't, since they changed things. So
no, since we don't know who the lord actually is.
Yeah, we don't have no idea. Speaking of her, the one thing I will say is you kind of see the way she interacts with her cousin. He's pleasant. He clearly kind of is loyal, and given that he's grieving and upset by her death, she's not very pleasant.
No, I kind of get what Damon told Rhaenyra in the previous episode, that I doubt the child could grow in such hostile environments.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to like people.
No.
And also, she apparently wasn't a very good hunter, because she said she was out for deer, did not get any deer. We see several pheasants, on the other hand, tied to her. So she may do with what she could get. So
yeah, sometimes they're hard to distinguish from each other. Deer, pheasants, peasants.
Next, to wrap up, is some dragon facts. There's this one dragon we'll discuss this time around.
Yeah. So with the arrival of the Velaryons to the wedding, we see two dragons flying into King's Landing in a cool sequence, and it is Sea Smoke that Laenor is flying in on, and it is Meleys, the Red Queen, that we see for the first time, and that is Princess Rhaenys' dragon. She was considered the swiftest of the Targaryen dragons in 75 AC. That was when she was still unclaimed, a fairly young, very swift she-dragon. And in 77 AC, Alyssa Targaryen, the mother of Viserys and Daemon, was the first to claim her, and she made the habit of strapping her infant sons to herself for flights on the back of the dragon.
She really loved flying.
She loved flying. Yes. She would not stop. I imagine she flew when she was pregnant as well. It's not like the dragon would mind the extra weight, I don't think.
So it's like, people who ride horses, they'll ride pretty much right up to birth, and then as soon as they're ready.
And certainly the dragon wouldn't notice a few extra kilos, and so and then as soon as she could, she strapped them on and took them up and had them flying.
We actually have a really lovely depiction of this in The Rise of a Dragon.
That's definitely one of my favorites.
I think there'll be a preview that might show it later down the road, but
it really shows her sort of delight in flying, and she's an interesting one in that she was described as not being your typically stunning Targaryen. No. She had mismatched eyes, I think, and slightly blonde ears and more
blonde hair,
dirty blonde rather than. But she was definitely very Targaryen in character, and I think you can see where Daemon gets his wilder ways from.
Yeah, There's some other aspects. She was also very, very lusty.
Yes.
Obviously, a lot of people. It's very interesting. In a recent interview, someone asked George, "Do you deliberately parallel characters in Fire and Blood with characters from, say, Songs on Fire, and he said no, he doesn't really. But some people insist that Alyssa shares a lot of similarities with a notable character from Songs on Fire, aka Tyrion, which feeds people into the theory that Tyrion is in fact a Targaryen, a secret Targaryen.
Yeah, I'd say that she was a little curvier than Tyrion.
Well, she's already a woman, but lusty, and the mismatched eyes is the main one.
Yeah.
But there are people who know more about. I recall people discussing the whole thing about what leads to that. I mean, it is a genetic thing.
Lustiness or mismatched eyes?
Presumably lustiness as well is partially genetic, but yes, but mismatched eyes is what I was talking about.
But anyway, she flew Malaise, and she died quite young, very sadly, and in 84 AC, and it was in 87 AC that Rhaenys then claimed her for herself and has written her ever since. So they've had quite a long partnership by this time. And that was really it for dragons in this episode.
Yeah, this episode is very low on dragon material.
It was a cool sequence when they fly in, but obviously lots of politics and murders instead. And it's set things up very nicely for the very appropriately named 6th episode, which is The Princess and the Queen, taking the title from one of the novellas that George turned the Fire and Blood material before it became Fire and Blood. And we're really seeing the conflict between the two main characters shaping up now and the camps that are forming around them.
And if you aren't aware, the 6th episode is the first where we will have the adult actors, or they are adult as well, but the older actors, Emma D'Arcy as Rhaenyra and Olivia Cook as Alicent.
Yes, and let's not misunderstand the adult actors now.
No. Well, they're all adult actors.
The older versions.
The older versions of the character. So, it's a bit of a jump. We'll see other characters, some that we haven't really met, and so on in that episode. So,
and the episode starts very much in medias res.
Yes.
It quick jumps into things.
Yeah, I thought it was
a fantastic opening. I think
fantastic. Directed by Miguel Sapochnik, I believe, as I recall. So, something to look forward to. We'll see you next week.